At 4:18 p.m. in the southern Caribbean, a quiet blip appeared on the radar of a U.S. Navy destroyer. At first, it seemed routine, just a Venezuelan patrol vessel moving along the horizon. Then everything changed. Without warning, the ship picked up speed, slicing across the water and lining up directly toward the American warship with the kind of precision that felt anything but accidental. Radio calls were sent. No answer. The closest point of approach kept shrinking. Engines thundered louder, and in only a few minutes, an ordinary patrol in international waters turned into a tense maritime confrontation. On the destroyer's bridge, the sailors didn't panic. They calculated. Every decision mattered. One wrong move, one misunderstood signal, and the situation could have spiraled into something far bigger between two nations. What happened next was something neither crew was expecting. The U.S. destroyer was operating legally in international waters, about 34 nautical miles off Venezuela's coast. But the vessel closing in was following a path no experienced mariner would describe as harmless. It was a direct intercept, steady, committed, with no course correction and no attempt to communicate. Bridge to CIC CPA. The officer of the deck asked the question everyone was already thinking. 3 miles and dropping, came the reply. In an instant, the atmosphere shifted. What had been routine watchstanding became focused readiness. Sailors leaned closer to their consoles. The captain, arms folded and eyes fixed ahead, issued a calm but firm order. Maintain the rules of engagement, record everything, hail once more, then prepare active measures. The first warning went out in English. Unidentified Venezuelan naval vessel. This is a United States warship conducting lawful transit. You are closing distance at high speed. Alter course immediately. No response. The second call went out in Spanish. Still nothing. And in that silence, the message was clear. In those waters, failing to answer a hail was not easily dismissed as an oversight. It felt deliberate. The destroyer raised its readiness without pushing the situation further. The SLQ-32 electronic warfare system powered up, tracking every radar signal coming from the approaching vessel. The 5-inch gun adjusted slightly toward the horizon, not enough to appear openly threatening, but enough for anyone watching to understand that the American crew was no longer treating this as routine traffic. At 4:22 p.m., the contact accelerated again, reaching 26 knots and driving its engines hard. Behind it, a long white wake stretched across the sea, the unmistakable signature of a ship charging forward, not simply patrolling. CIC confirms intercept bearing. Intent appears deliberate. On American warships, moments like this create a very particular kind of silence. No wasted words, no unnecessary movement, just training taking over. Lookouts reported activity on the Venezuelan deck. Several figures appeared near the forward Otto Melara 76mm gun. Helmets visible, crew clustered nearby. They were not actively operating it, but their presence alone said plenty. They were watching, measuring, testing the response. Flight ops green, the captain ordered. Below deck, the Seahawk helicopter crew moved instantly. Boots struck steel. Sensor pods were secured. Flares were loaded. Engines spun up. In that moment, the helicopter was not there to attack. It was a signal, a careful, non-lethal move in a much larger game, a way of saying, we see exactly what you're doing. Back in CIC, radar tracking became even tighter. The Venezuelan ship shifted into active surface search mode. The power level was low, but the meaning was unmistakable. It was not a weapons lock, but it was uncomfortably close to that line. At 4:26 p.m., the Seahawk lifted off, sweeping hard across the destroyer's bow and heading straight toward the contact at just 200 feet above the water. Its MX-20 FLIR camera locked on immediately, capturing every heat signature, every movement on deck, every detail that might later matter. The CPA dropped below 2 nautical miles. Time to CPA, 6 minutes. On both ships, the pressure was rising. The crew stayed steady, but the edge was there. 2 vessels closing fast in international waters, one advancing, the other holding position. No shots had been fired, no collision had happened. But everyone involved understood the reality. This was no longer a normal patrol, it was now a standoff. And the next 5 minutes would decide just how far it would go. The Seahawk's rotors hammered through the Caribbean air in a steady metallic rhythm as it flew low over the water toward the Venezuelan patrol ship. Below, the sea looked almost unnaturally calm, a sharp contrast to the tension building above it. through the MX-20 FLIR, the picture became even clearer. Movement across the deck, helmeted crew members, and the shimmering heat of engines running at full strain. Whatever the Venezuelan crew meant to do, they were not hiding it. Back inside the U.S. destroyer's CIC, voices moved across the room in a controlled rhythm, calm, exact, and always ahead of the moment. Contact Sierra 79, maintaining 26 knots, the tracking officer reported. CPA 1.8 miles, time to CPA 4 minutes. The numbers made the situation plain. The Venezuelan ship was not simply following, it was not attempting to communicate. It was pressing forward with purpose. And with every mile it closed, each move seemed less like routine seamanship and more like a calculated probe of limits, of procedure, of how much restraint the Americans would show. On the Venezuelan deck, the FLIR feed showed 3 sailors gathered near the forward gun mount. One had binoculars locked to his face. Another appeared to be speaking into a handheld radio. None of them laid a hand on the weapon, but they did not need to. Their presence there was pressure enough. Inside CIC, the electronic warfare officer spoke up. Venezuelan radar spike, surface search mode, low power. They're tracking us, not locking us. That distinction mattered. A fire control lock would have changed the entire encounter in an instant. But this was the gray zone. The space where actions can be aggressive without becoming openly hostile, where intent can be obvious and still denied later. The Seahawk moved into a safe standoff position, banking wide in a deliberate show of presence. It was not configured for combat. The torpedo bay remained closed. Even so, the message was unmistakable. Every sailor on the Venezuelan deck could feel the full weight of American surveillance overhead. Then the warning came. A brief green laser flashed across the Venezuelan bridge windows. Non-lethal, non-damaging, impossible to miss. It was a standard U.S. Navy signal. Your actions are being watched, and your approach is unsafe. A moment later, the Seahawk broadcast over loudspeaker, Venezuelan naval vessel, you are conducting unsafe maneuvers in international waters. Alter course immediately. Then the same warning came again in Spanish. Still, the Venezuelan ship stayed on course. 26 knots. Bow aimed straight at the American destroyer. Wake boiling behind it, engines pushed hard. On the destroyer's bridge, the captain did not flinch. Helm, maintain course and speed. We're not blinking. U.S. Navy doctrine in a moment like this was clear. Do not escalate, do not yield, and do not hand the other side the moment it may be trying to provoke. But the atmosphere had become charged, like a storm made of steel, radar, and discipline. Sensors showed the Venezuelan vessel beginning a shallow zigzag, the kind of pattern often used in close-pass pressure runs. No weapon systems came fully online. No targeting lock appeared. Just an unmistakably predatory posture from less than 2 miles away. Maintain station, the captain ordered. The Seahawk responded immediately, shifting into a lateral orbit that kept both ships fully framed in its sensors. Its FLIR feed streamed live into CIC, recording high-resolution video, thermal signatures, and exact geolocation data. This was more than observation now. It was evidence. Professional, time-stamped, precise. The kind of record that could matter later, whether in a diplomatic protest, an international forum, or a breaking news segment. Then came the first sign of change. Contact reducing wake, Surface Watch reported. Speed dropped. 24. 22. The Venezuelan ship was still closing, but now with less force, less certainty. Movement on deck changed too. The sailors near the forward gun stepped back. One raised both arms, palms outward, a familiar maritime gesture signaling no attack intent. The ship continued forward, but its heading began to shift, first by a single degree, then 2, then 5. The destroyer held its line. The Seahawk held its orbit. CIC recorded every second. At a CPA of 1.9 miles, the Venezuelan patrol vessel finally made a clear, deliberate turn. It was no longer driving toward the destroyer's bow. Instead, it started to slide past the American ship's starboard quarter. It was not a retreat. It was something quieter than that, an acknowledgement. Pressure had been applied. Pressure had been answered. And pressure, at least for the moment, had stopped short of becoming something worse. Inside CIC, someone let out a quiet breath. Not relief, recognition. The confrontation had reached its peak, a boundary had been tested, and neither side had crossed the point where tension becomes irreversible. But it still was not over, because the part no one expected was only minutes away. The instant the Venezuelan patrol ship eased off its throttle, the entire mood of the encounter began to change. What had started as a hard, direct charge softened into something more cautious. Speed fell from 26 knots to 24, then 22, then 19. Its wake shortened. The bow settled. And for the first time in 10 tense minutes, the American destroyer's sensors picked up something other than escalation. Contact altering course by 5 degrees to starboard, CIC reported. It was a small adjustment, but at sea, 5 degrees can say more than an entire radio exchange. From above, the Seahawk's MX-20 Fleer caught the shift immediately, not just in the ship's heading, but in the mood on deck. The sailors who had been lingering near the forward gun earlier were now stepping away. One raised both arms again, palms forward. It did not look like mockery, and it did not look like defiance. It looked like a signal. We're done here. Even so, procedure came first. The Seahawk stayed in orbit, holding a steady lateral position to make clear that the U.S. crew was not taking the maneuver at face value too quickly. Its camera followed the Venezuelan patrol ship's bow as the turn developed, confirming that the vessel was no longer driving toward the destroyer. It was now moving to pass rather than intercept. Then, at last, the silence on the radio broke. United States naval vessel, we are conducting sovereign patrol duties in proximity to Venezuelan waters. Request you adjust heading for safety. It was a carefully worded transmission, an indirect way of easing back without openly admitting it. The American response came without hesitation. Venezuelan naval vessel, we are conducting lawful transit in international waters. Your previous maneuvers were unsafe and have been recorded. We will maintain present course. Then the radio went quiet again. But this time, the silence felt different. Not tense, not sharp, settled. The Seahawk made one final wide orbit, filming the Venezuelan ship as it gradually drifted farther away. The patrol vessel was still there, still visible off the destroyer's starboard quarter, but it had changed roles completely, no longer pressing forward, no longer forcing the moment. Now it was simply a presence on the horizon, watching, lingering, making a point without pushing further. At 4:38 p.m., the Seahawk climbed and banked back toward the destroyer. On deck, the crew cleared space as the helicopter came in and touched down smoothly, the kind of landing that reflected a team fully in control from start to finish. No warning shots, no overreaction, just disciplined, precise deterrence. By the time the rotors slowed to a stop, the Venezuelan ship was nearly 6 nautical miles behind, its outline shrinking into the Caribbean haze. Still watching, perhaps, but no longer challenging. Aboard the U.S. destroyer, the after-action process began immediately. Every radar return, every movement on deck, every signal, every second of video was logged in detail. Not because anyone wanted the situation to grow larger, but because the record matters long after the ships have gone their separate ways. And that is where the deeper context begins to matter. This did not appear to be a random burst of bravado or a captain making a reckless sunset move. Analysts had already been tracking a broader pattern. Just 2 weeks earlier, the United States had intercepted 2 Venezuelan-linked vessels suspected of moving illicit cargo northward. The operation was quiet, precise, and widely discussed afterward, and it clearly drew attention in Caracas. What followed fit a familiar pattern. Deeper patrols, unpredictable approaches, low-altitude flyovers, radar probing, and now this close pass at sea. The point was not open conflict. The point was pressure. Enough to project toughness for a home audience. Enough to suggest resolve, but still short of the line that would force a much larger response. From the U.S. side, restraint was not hesitation. It was policy. A very deliberate kind of control that says, we do not need to react loudly to make our position clear. We only need to hold steady, observe, and document. By 4:45 p.m., the gap between the two ships had widened to nearly 9 miles. The destroyer never changed its heading. It stayed on course, steady, composed, professional to the last detail. No collision, no exchange of fire, no escalation report, and yet both sides had still delivered a message. Venezuela's message, we are here and we can apply pressure. The U.S. message, apply all the pressure you want. We are not moving unless you force the issue. In a world where a single turn of the helm can become tomorrow's headline, this encounter ended in the way most people never expect. Not with chaos, but with discipline. And sometimes those are the moments that speak the loudest.